recording the lecture. Okay. Start the recording right now. Okay, so the second issue is really it comes down to you need to decide how many neighbors to. You want to decide the nearest neighbor method, right? KNN. Okay, pick how many nearest neighbors. That's the question. How many nearest neighbors do we pick? Is it gonna? So in the paper, the author suggested that we pick 10, 24 neighbors, right? But the space really is only 72 dimensional. So I found its strength. If we recall, if you remember, last week we spent the entire hour to talk about this invertibility issue, right? So I want to bring this up again. I think it's a crucial point I want you to investigate in this homework. Do we really need to pick 10, 24, so many neighbors, or would a smaller number be sufficient? Okay, so that's the question. How many neighbors? That's what I mean sufficiency. Do we really need 10, 24 vectors, or chances are we only need 10 vectors, for example? So I think that's a valid question to ask. And the third point is, as I mentioned, given the output feature vectors, a sequence of, let's say, male coefficients and their deltas, then how do we translate them back? Translation, okay? How do we map the vectors back to a vocoder representation, okay? So you need to find out in this somewhere, sooner or later, you need to synthesize the sound, right? So we need to put everything back to the vocoder representation in order to finally synthesize the signal, okay? So 3 questions. Any questions so far? Any comments so far? Yeah, so far? Okay, so let me move on to the next slide. Next slide. Okay, so I propose, so here's the deal. I'm going to assign 80% of this homework to what I call a baseline. You should all work on the baseline first, okay? And 20% for advanced topics. So what is the 80% should cover what? It should cover, so I suggest that for the baseline, let's first simplify the scenario a bit by only considering the static 24 order male chemical coefficients. All right, from your vocoder representation, you should be able to convert them back to convert them to 24 order male chemical coefficients, so that our feature space is 24 dimensional, only the static ones, without considering the delta means subtracting the previous frame from the current frame, okay, delta. Delta means a second order difference, okay? So let's forget about delta first, okay? Let's only focus on static features, and I think that should be simpler. That should simplify our picture quite a bit. Only considering the static 24 MCCs, then perform this, okay? Then I would like you to go through equations 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 of the paper under our discussion, okay? Now here, to remind you a bit about the notation, here A is the set of your nearest neighbors, okay? So A is a fat matrix, each column is a frame. So each column now is 24 dimensional. And A, the kind of how wide it is, depends on how many nearest neighbor you choose from the dictionary. Okay, so it's a fat matrix and each column is a frame, represent a frame of now converted to MCC, 24 dimensional MCC vectors. Okay, clear? A is so A transpose A is a large matrix, and which I argue that A transpose A is not invertible. It has some issue. It is not invertible if K, the number of neighbors, is greater than our dimensionality, which is 24 for now. There should be an invertibility issue here, okay? But anyway, so in the next slide, I will remind you of the regularization technique, okay? So here, let me just go through it. So A transpose A, that's the meaning. And X is what? X is the vector, is our input feature vector, which is also 24-dimensional. Okay? And we need to find out weight vectors. This weight vector should be a long vector, and this weight vector consists of linear combination coefficients. Okay, so if you choose 1024 neighbors, then you need to decide 1024 weights. That's the meaning. Is that clear? W is a set of linear combination coefficients that we need to calculate. We need to compute. Okay. And there is also a Lagrange multiplier, and we need to do, and the meaning of Lagrange multiplier here is to ensure that all the weights sums up to 1. All the weights sum up to 1. All the linear combinations sum up to 1. Okay, and in the paper it argued that if we constrain all the coefficients need to sum up to 1, then then the weight becomes independent of your coordinate system. It doesn't matter where is the origin. And we can talk about that if you're interested. Okay, let me say sum. When we have this constraint, then it doesn't matter how you define the origin. It becomes translational. It becomes invariant to translation. 根据对于平移变成是不变的啊 ，translational invariance. That's the underlying spirit. Why we have this constraint, and consequently, in your program, you also need to compute a Lagrange multiplier, subject to because of this constraint. Okay. So the two of them, after computing the two of them, then what is E? Oh yeah. Then basically we can determine the weight vector from the input. The input, when we get into the conclusion that we have the input right here, and you apply a linear transformation. This is a linear transformation, right? And then there is also a bias term. The bias term that is partially due to this constraint. Okay, so there is a bias term. So yeah, you implement all of these. Okay, and it should be, although it looks complicated, I say everything should be. There is not much of confusion here. 应该不太会混淆吧? Everything is well defined. Okay, so then even though it looks the expression looks long, I hope that when you implement it, there is not little confusion about this. The only confusion would be, as I said, would be the fact that actually A transpose A is not invertible, and I think that's the biggest issue. The only but quite a big issue here. Okay, any comments for now? 这边有没有不清楚的地方? Is there any comments? It should be pretty explicit. Everything is explicitly written, except the part that A transpose A is not invertible. So to deal with invertibility, in the next slide, let me remind. So last week we talked about, let's name this A transpose A. Let's name it G. Okay, and we know that G would not be invertible if its size is greater than 24. Then what should we do? So the solution, as we discussed last week, is that to add A transpose A with a regularization term, which is a diagonal matrix, which is basically epsilon, a small epsilon times the identity matrix. So once we define G as this, then G prime becomes invertible. Then we replace G with G prime. Everywhere when we see A transpose A showing up in the equations, okay? Just replace A transpose A with itself plus a small regularization diagonals matrix. So now, in principle, G prime becomes invertible, okay? So that's kind of the suggestion in the paper. Actually, not in the suggestion in the literature, okay? Is that clear? Yes?
There was something that you did with epsilon, you set it equal to like
Right.
trace or something.
Yeah. That's a kind of scaling factor. So the depending on the nature of A has a certain meaning. So the trace of A kind of tells you the generally how large the eigenvalues of A transpose A are. Okay, so so basically, but regardless, epsilon is just a small number, a number, a scalar, a positive. I believe it should be positive. Yeah, positive small number. Okay, and you get to explore that. Yeah, choose an epsilon and see how that affects the results. Okay, but in the meanwhile, I want to share with you. I have this expectation. Okay, I don't know the answer yet, but for the sake of my curiosity, okay, you guys can help me a lot on clarifying the issue. For the sake of understanding, in this homework, I like to require you to investigate whether we can avoid this non-invertible matrix issue by simply choosing K to be smaller than D. Let me say again. If so, all the problems stem from the fact that A transpose A will be not invertible, right? If the size is bigger than 24. Okay. So how about let's forget about choosing a lot of neighbors. How about we choose for every input frame, we only choose, let's say, 20 neighbors, or even 16, or even 8, or even 10, a number smaller than 24. Then we are kind of projecting the vector onto a lower dimensional space. And that's the spirit, should be the actual spirit of linearly embedding. Embed, right? Meaning to embed something, meaning 嵌入, to project onto a lower dimensional space, right? So I suspect, I really don't quite get it why we, in the paper, why the paper suggested that we choose so many neighbors, okay? So because the true spirit of embedding is really to choose fewer number of vectors and try to span the space and project our input vector onto that lower dimensional space. And it becomes a least square problem, right? So in that, so the conclusion that if we choose K to be anywhere not higher than D, then most likely the matrix becomes invertible. And this is a classical classical least mean square problem, and then matrix invertible, and then we can probably, I bet we can totally avoid the invertibility problem. Okay, so now that if what I say is correct, I want you to figure out. Okay, then if this is doable, then I am curious, and you guys can help me to clarify whether or not that would affect the audio quality of synthesized signal. Choosing either a large number of neighbors or choosing a small number of neighbors. Okay, smaller number of neighbors is easier to solve. You know, inverting a matrix is much easier. But with that, we sacrifice the synthesized sound quality. I don't know. But in principle, I don't see why we choose so many neighbors. There might be something which I missed. Okay, so you guys can help me clarify by trying to choose a smaller K, smaller than D, and we are dealing with the classical least square problem. And then with that, chances are, if the audio quality, if voice conversion can still be done, then we learn a lot. Then we learn that really it's not necessary to choose a lot of neighbors. I don't know yet, but I would like you to help me figure out, okay? You confident? You happy? So this is the kind of the basic part for this homework. The math should be easier, actually. When you choose a smaller, for better or for worse, you should be able to handle it, I hope. So that's the requirement for the basic requirement for the homework, and this will account for 80% of your grade. And the next slide are the other 20%. Okay, so what are the further ideas you might be able to explore? Here I bring about three items. So I would like to share with you 3 items. The first is about F0. When the source speaker is talking, the range of F0 might be different from that of the target speaker, right? let's say we convert from a guy to a girl, right? From male speaker to female speaker. The range of F0 is quite different, right? For any two people, when we think about F0, how do we transform F0 so that the result of voice conversion could be convincing? Do we simply scale the pitch, or do we, well, what this you are free to explore some any idea, okay? Any idea is welcome, but yeah, it needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed. Okay, so F0, yeah, F0 transformation. That's the first topic you might be able to explore. The second topic is to implement Peng Yuhuai's fast version. Okay, so far I was suggesting in the previous slide I was suggesting for every interference just find the k neighbors, right? But for Peng Yuhuai's fast version, let's recall that he's proposed to first cluster the dictionary into by anchor points. Okay, if you recall in his fast implementation, and he does so so that the purpose is to move a lot of matrix inversion computation from online to offline. Those are like inverse matrices can be computed offline and beforehand, let me say, offline beforehand. So that's why his algorithm can run faster, much faster than the classical local linear embedding. Okay, so if you're interested, please try this by yourself. And in doing that, you will need to cluster your source dictionary into clustering, data clustering. Okay, so you will and the way the paper describes it is that you will scaffold the vector space, your feature space, with anchor points, and possibly using k-means. Okay? For those of you that are familiar with it, k-means is standard clustering algorithm. You don't need to reinventing the wheels. If you can find resources that runs k-means for you, please use it. Okay, so that's another point. And the third point is what I mean is quite tricky. Okay, and we'll continue this discussion on the third point. I've asked the TA to cover this topic, particularly this third topic, okay? And what is the topic about? It's about, the issue is, there's a difficulty, okay? So in the paper, in the 2017 paper, we suggest that when we do local linear embedding, the feature space that's suggested by the paper is a concatenation. It's a concatenation of male coefficients and its delta and its delta delta. So by delta, we mean, as I said, delta means you subtract your previous frame from the current frame. That's delta, first order difference. 相减的也叫 delta 嘛, okay? And also the delta of that, so double delta, okay? So for 24-dimensional static features, then we concatenate this delta, that's adds another 24 dimensions. And then we also computed the delta of delta, and that further adds another 24 dimensions. So that's why in the previous lecture, I've been saying that the vector space is 72-dimensional, okay, in the paper. That's what was suggested by the paper. And it's fine, you apply locally linear embedding and then it linearly combines. So now the result is also a 72-dimensional vector. Is that right? Wait, I need to. Actually, maybe not. Okay, so let's say this. Okay, let's say when we do the mapping, I need to clarify this a bit. Let's say if our source dictionary is now 24, 24, 24 for static delta and double delta, right? And if this is our source dictionary, and we do the same for the target dictionary. 24, 24, 24. For the target. And we somehow align the two dictionaries, the parallel corpus accordingly. Okay? If this is our representation for every frame. Then we have the alignment, kind of index mapping from the source to the target. And you have done that. I suppose that you have done that without considering the delta. Okay? But now if we consider delta, there is the difficulty. There comes the difficulty, right? Because when we also consider delta during the dynamic time working as well as local linear transformation, then the result is also going to be a sequence of vectors which are 72-dimensional. So that's why I said there could be a problem. Now here's the problem. Just right, if this is the kind of the set of your output output frames, okay? For each frame, now every frame is represented by not only MCC but also the delta and double delta. Then the difficulty is that there is an issue of how do we synthesize the vocoder representation, given not only the MCC but also their deltas, right? Do we see? Does anybody see where the problem is? You're given the MCC, and that's fine. You can use it straightforward, and they synthesize the output. Okay, but now you're given the MCC plus its delta and double delta. So I found it to be kind of awkward situation. It could be an awkward situation, and the difficulty is, let me see. So the issue. So I hope that you're feeling there the issue. Okay, so the issue is here. I summarize. How do we synthesize MCC, not MCC, okay? How do we synthesize MCC when its time derivatives are also given? How do we take also consider those derivatives? Because MCC itself can do the job already, right? But if we run into this issue, then there are a few strategies. The first strategy is, as I said, just to ignore the deltas. Okay, I think that's totally fine. Might be fine. Okay, but if you are kind of worried about this, maybe we can do better. And then here's another strategy of which I asked the TA to cover next week. Okay, so the next week I have some errands to run in Taipei, so I'll be absent. Okay, so I asked the TAs to be our substitute lecturer for next week, next Thursday. So if you want to work on this, there's a thing called maximum likelihood parameter generation, which which might do the job, right? Which might answer the question: how do we synthesize some future vectors if their time derivatives are also given? If their time derivatives are also suggested. So how do we synthesize a sequence that sort of minimizes that is most likely to happen, most likelihood, maximum likelihood method, okay? So I'll leave that for next week, but now we have a reference, okay? So in this PowerPoint, I'm not going to play the sound, okay? You can find it on the eLearn, okay? But let me just bring this up. So this is a slide that we presented at the beginning of the semester, okay? I'd like to thank you for sticking with the class because a lot of people showed up, but only maybe 40% of them dropped. Okay? So you guys are the people who are persistent in this class. I really appreciate that. Thank you for being here. Well, let me still play this out. So in the beginning of the semester, I played to you. Here is a kind of source talker. Not playing. Everybody's playing through my. This is please revisit this set of slides to get an idea. This is to show you that how good this paper can kind of the sound quality that is achieved by algorithms specified in this paper. Okay, this is kind of you want to have an expectation of how well this algorithm can do the job. if everything is handled correctly. 好 So finally, a bit about administration. The grading percentage wise, for the previous 9 homeworks, account for 43%, and I promise I will grade your 7, 8 plus 9. And we have done a quiz, which is 10%, and class participation. So thank you for many of you that chose to speak up during our previous meetings. That's great. And so by the end of the semester, I will ask you to self-report roughly how many times you have spoken up in the classroom. Okay, just roughly. How many times you have presented on behalf of your group. Okay, just on the code. Just be honest. And then for this homework, the due date is June 29th, which is a Monday, the Monday after Dragon Boat, and at midnight. The page limit is 5. Okay, and this homework will account for 10% of your final grade. Okay, so please do your best on that. And we have another quiz that is scheduled on June 16th. Not next week, but the week after next week. And the paper, I will announce which paper to read, okay? But probably related to 7, 8, 9, 10. It's going to be related to 7, 8, 9, 10, okay? And so that's the second quiz and the final project. And we'll keep track of your final project. Hope you enjoy the time. And that will be 20% and no report, merely based on presentation, okay? No return report. So that kind of review of everything. Any question?
Quick question about homework 10. You said there's a 20%?
Right.
For advanced parts. Is it all advanced parts, or do we pick and choose the advanced
Pick and choose, yeah.
So one of the advanced parts is all that you require?
No. I'll see who does better. Okay.
So it's how we perform on the advanced parts.
Yeah, it's like a general. I will try to. In my mind, I will try to consider kind of overall performance. Yeah.
So the more
if you do one item really well, that's great. But if you touch base on all the 3 items, that's also good. It's up to you. But please cover the basic part first, because I'm super curious about the dimensionality. If K is less than D, maybe we can still solve the problem. There is no need for regularization. And yeah, I'm really curious about that. And you guys can help me. Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
Is the quiz assigned due the 16th, or is it?
Oh, that's a good question.
Due the 16th.
Right. It's going to be. Right, so last time, what do we do? Last time I told you the paper, right? I announced the paper a few days earlier. And then I urged you to read the paper over the weekend, and then I announced the quiz on the day, and you were given a period to complete your writing, right? Let's try to do roughly the same, okay? And any suggestion? Can it be handled better? Maybe giving you a shorter time for writing to reduce kind of the duration.
Following the same pattern seems good to me. So we had, I think, all Tuesday to do it.
All Tuesday?
I think all Wednesday. I can't quite remember.
Something like that. That's what we did last time. OK， 可能有同学会想说，不如2小时把它搞定。No? Do you prefer to finish things in 2 hours? 长痛不如短痛. Long pain is more miserable than short pain. If you have the feeling, I'm open to suggestions. For me, yes. I see, right. So coming from Alex, he said longer pain is more fair or easier for people who have a busy schedule. But however busy you are, you should have 2 hours, right? Because this class. Just to come into the classroom, right?
I guess if we're in the classroom, yeah.
For people in the classroom, right? And we only have one person, Sun Haihang, that is in China, mainland China. So yeah. Anyway, it's probably going to be either 2 hour or 24 hour. Okay, so please try to plan your schedule accordingly. If we decide 24 hours, I hope that you find time to within the 24 hours to work on it. Okay, most likely 24 hours. But if you really prefer, you strongly prefer 2-hour format, please talk to me privately. Okay, 长痛不如短痛的话，有时候了，还不如赶快搞定啊。Okay, so any more questions? So that's about it. Thank you for being here. We'll see each other next Tuesday over Zoom. Okay, thank you.
好，那通过时的 spec 什么时候是啊
Spec 就是这样子。That's a spec.
我说通过时。
Yeah, this is a spec.
哦。
Okay. Or yes. Yes. 什么？只是做 fast 可能会比较，你要有 K 命的，其实啊。是一定如果要做 fast 的话，前面那个比较重要。我觉得基本上是I cannot see how you go around without doing the basic part. Jump straight into the faster version. For me, the fast version is the basic version plus you need to pre-process your dictionary with K-mean. Yeah. 我当初考虑的时候是觉得说，因为我们这门课究竟不是 machine learning 不见得每个人也都有学过 K-mean, so it might be a bit unfair to require everybody to implement the fast version. Okay, so that's why I suggest in here we cover the basic, which is gonna take longer to run. It's slower, but in that we don't need K-means. We don't need to scaffold our data or dictionary with anchor points. We don't need to perform clustering. 好吧，所以梦汉能力应该没问题了，都可以做。好 ，right， 好，那就谢谢大家哈 ，Thank you for being here.
Quick unrelated question. You said Dr. Lin's class had a lot of homework. Is it about the same workload as this or more workload?
It depends. The style is quite different. Teaching style might be quite different because I feel that generally people in computer science love challenges. So a professor can get good reputation if the homeworks are all super hard. And he gets good reputation for that. And I heard that your grade is merely according to your rank because each homework is like competition. So
it's really hard.
It's like head-on competition with your fellow classmates. So that's a style. Of course, you work in groups, but that's a style. He encouraged competition. Yeah. Every homework is a competition. And in the end, you see your rank, and you kind of know your score. If you rank really low, you kind of have the expectation.
这个 source dictionary 的部分是我们对齐之后，就是每个 frame 就是它的 dictionary， 所以就是然后对每个 frame 去做 KN 的时候，它这个 nearest neighbor 是指距离最近还是时间上比较近？
因为你想新的东西讲话就是全新的，每个 frame 就当做一个从来不存在的东西，然后你要在 existing 这个 dictionary 去找最像的。
所以是看 distance，
对，跟时间无关的，因为
没有就那种 coefficient 来看，它是独立于这个，所以这个 dictionary 是我们实测有影响的到 dictionary， 就是对齐。
在做 linear combination 的时候，其实跟时序已经无关了，
因为是新的东西。
对。
所以就是从里面去找它 distance 最近的会算多，然后把这个 index 去找出它的 weighted， 然后对应到这个。
其实我隐约觉得，现在我觉得问题出在哪里？为什么要找1020？不找直接找少？有点奇怪。我跟你分享一下我想到的，但我今天忘了讲。我先回一下他的信。
可以问一下，因为有些地方我没有到很懂，可以直接问。
可以，请说。
就是还是他刚
我们刚刚讨论到一个很细节的东西，那个我改天再说。我觉得我刚刚隐约觉得，我先回答他的问题。我隐约觉得为什么要找1024个，可能是因为我们当时找18个，18个我找起来全部都很像。因为讲话是很慢的一个过程，
是刚好都抓到，就是
对，就像也许跟你讲的，对，时间差不多就走某个音节嘛，
说这样抓到了，
他可能抓这个东西不够 diverse， 但是我会觉得说，要解决这个问题，应该是从 fine 你抓了1024个里面再去做一些 dimension reduction，
然后那应该是去删减，先去删减，
对，先去删减，或者说你去 run 一个 在里面去 run 一个 PCA 或什么，因为我会觉得说这个真的很脏啊，就是说怎么可以明明不 invertible 的东西哪里 invert？ 那你的问题是哪？
我意思就是比较就是传统的时候，他不是先 input 一个